Carolyn Everson, what a joy to have you joining the Bloomberg Work Shifting Conference and discussion. And I think it's so important that you're here to really start the discussion off, because not only can people see from your bio your success, the influence that you have within the business, the 40,000 people you help manage, but what they perhaps don't see, that I see so much at the moment, is the way in which you are networking and discussing and helping bring diverse voices to the main at the moment. You're using your private networks, you're also using your public social channels. The Ask Me Anythings you're doing on Instagram at the moment, where anyone wanting to emulate some of your success, understand your learnings, but also understand your vulnerabilities and where you feel that perhaps you could have done better, can listen in, ask you whatever is on their mind, perhaps where you get your fabulous Zoom outfits like this jumper that we see right now. But I think you're such an authentic voice to have start this discussion. And let's start that discussion with the Zoom outfits, with the way in which you are currently operating as a business. How has the pandemic, the health crisis, the economic crisis, the social crisis, the work from home made it different on your day to day? What does today look like for you?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Caroline. The reality is that this last year, I think fundamentally everything has changed. We have changed how we work, where we work, the type of leadership we bring to the table, and of course, just from a business perspective, what the role Facebook and our platforms can play in providing accurate information. But let me start with how it's changed for me personally. I think it is very clear that all of us are bringing our authentic selves to the workplace now that work is at home and it's not just working from home. We have people doing Zoom meetings in their bedroom. That's where I am right now. We are seeing the window into people's lives with their children and their pets. And we can't deny the fact that there is no longer a separation between work and home life. And I deeply believe that it is ushering in an urgent era of enlightened leadership. And what I mean by that is, for my almost 30 years of being in the workplace and all of the training and education I've received, a lot of it was about how to be an effective leader, how to make sure you deliver the numbers, how to make sure that you're delivering on the plans for the business. But what is more important is actually how we show up as enlightened leaders, a topic I'm incredibly passionate about, which is simply bringing the humanity into the work environment, demonstrating our authenticity, our vulnerabilities, our empathy, our generosity, really just human qualities. And by opening ourselves up, we're really having very different types of conversations with our team members. At the end of the day, leaders and everyone alike, we all get up in the morning, we all brush our teeth and put our jumpers and outfits on. And I think the more approachable we can be as leaders, I believe the totally a different dialogue is opening up in companies.
So interesting you say that, and apologies to the audience when you hear my 1-year-old wake up at some point. She's in the room just below me. You're getting a very authentic version of our mad London living right now. But Carolyn, how is that conversation becoming a reality? Are people able to dial into your Zoom conference, the individuals on your team, when they're having a rough day? What does it look like tangibly?
Well, I always say when you see somebody on Zoom or Skype or whatever video service we're using, you don't know actually what's going on behind the camera. You don't know what kind of morning they've had, what kind of evening they've had before, whether, there's a madhouse going on behind the scenes and they've just put on their, smile and got in front of the Zoom in order to look, professional. And so the first thing I say to everybody is just check in with everybody that you do a meeting with. How are you doing today? Because that usually will open up a dialogue around what's really going on behind the scenes. For me, when I think about the last year, between losing my dad in December of 2019, I entered 2020 trying to process that grief, talking very openly, by the way, with my team that I was, seeking therapy around how much that grief was overwhelming me, I should say. Then COVID hits and it has impacted people in so many different ways on many different timelines. Then you layer in racial injustice and the awakening that occurred around the world. And now you're layering in a lot of anxiety about what the future of work is. But you know what? Behind the scenes, there were 8 people living in my home, 6 dogs. I was managing my own grief, I was trying to manage my mom, who is really, really suffering from the loss of her husband of 58 years, my father. And, there were many days where it was chaos behind the scenes. And yet I had to put the good face on when I got in front of the Zoom. And I've tried to humanize that and really speak very openly about it. So it gives people the permission to know that none of us have this all figured out. We're all making it up on the fly. I mean, before this interview, Caroline, my husband got feedback that my glasses were glaring, my $3 glasses from Amazon into the screen, and he's running around. And if I could turn the camera around, there's like sheets and masking tape all over the windows right now, and I'm not even sure it made a difference. But that's the reality. We're all trying to figure it out together.
On that note, then, how are you? How are you doing? How are you? How did people ask you in the peak of? I can imagine for you. You talk about anxiety. You talk about feeling isolated. The hunger for human interaction, particularly at that moment where you were leading the business that was suffering the boycott coming from some of your key clients. How did you feel? What did you learn?
There was no question that 2020 was the hardest professional year I have had in my career, across a number of dimensions. You mentioned the boycott. Obviously, we were dealing with COVID. I was dealing a lot behind the scenes personally with myself and my mom and the grief. A lot of issues were happening. And so when I look back, like part of me is just grateful that I got through 2020 with my feet on the ground, but that was not all smooth sailing. There were many days where I would break down, break down in tears and wonder, how is it going to get better? How am I going to get through it? But I found strength in optimism. I am a very optimistic person, and I have a Maya Angelou print in my bathroom that I see every day, which is about tomorrow being better. And people will forget, what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I feel an enormous obligation to the team that I lead, to the clients and partners, to the community that I represent, to ensure that I leave them, each moment, whether that's a meeting or a speech, with a feeling of optimism that we are going to get through this. And we're starting to see the signs of that in certain countries. And yet other countries like Brazil are in the midst of, what might be a true humanitarian crisis. And so it's really understanding the audience and dialing up optimism when need be, but also being a realist and understanding what people are going through. And what that all means is empathy, is showing up with deep empathy that the way you and I might be experiencing this are likely very different. We might have people on our teams that are living by themselves, that have poor Wi-Fi connections or live in multi-generation housing and are desperate to get back in the office. I have other people that are looking at it and saying, you know what? I want my commute time back. I want to have dinner with my family every night, particularly working parents. And I think there's going to be a real reflection period coming out of this. I like to say, as big as the digital transformation has been for businesses over the last year, where they've had to become more digital, more e-commerce focused, I actually believe the human transformation that has occurred and is occurring is going to be even bigger.
So many launch pads from there and where we go from those few comments. Carolyn, therefore, let's dig down on what you think the future of Facebook looks like.
As I think
to Germany facing lockdown, the US feeling a more optimistic place right now. What do you think work life, I wouldn't say it's a balance ever, but the fusion of our work and our life work, how do you think that looks like in 2021, 2022 and there on out?
I think, Caroline, the biggest shift is that the future of work is really about the future of workers and about how we allow a lot more flexibility into the workplace, which I think is going to be a net hugely positive thing for society. So, for example, we came out very early that we are in support of remote work. And what we mean by remote work is truly allowing people to work wherever they want to be, as opposed to having to come to a central office and hub. And what that opens up is enormous opportunities for inclusivity. Think of engineers that can suddenly apply to work at Facebook without having to move to the expensive hubs like London and Singapore and San Francisco and Seattle. suddenly we can get engineering talent from all around the world. So I'm very excited about the remote work options. I think there will be people that want to be back in an office environment 5 days a week, and that certainly will be an option for a portion of the population. And then I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility in the in between, where people are going to really curate how they work to make it work for their life. One of the things that I have been very passionate about at Facebook, and we launched about 7 years ago, is a program called Fuel. And I know I've shared some of the elements with you around it, around writing visions and being very clear about what's important to you. And for me, in order to have an extraordinary company that delivers exceptional results, you need to have a happy workforce. People need to know that they can achieve both. And for me, that means we're going to have to adapt to many different modes of working. And that is going to stretch us as leaders. But at the end of the day, at the heart of it, I think we're all going to be better in the future of work and what the corporate culture sort of 2.0 looks like from here.
You talk about a happy employee base. And of course, in many ways, there is a responsibility that's fallen not just on your shoulders as a leader, but every one of the employees at Facebook. When you look at the role and responsibility of the business throughout the social strife that we've seen in particular, how do you think Facebook's owning that and speaking to its own employee base and able to watch their CEO up in front of Congress for the upteenth time, trying to defend sort of the ways in which it counteracts hate speech, the way in which Facebook does try to deal with misinformation? Is that something that you think the employees are able to digest right now and the business is leading forward on?
I think I can speak on behalf of myself, and I think this is probably a similar feeling. If I didn't personally believe that we were taking necessary steps to constantly improve the way we show up around the safety of our platforms, then that would be a very difficult thing to digest and frankly to stay at the company. And what I have seen is a constant thirst for improving the way we handle these societal issues. So if I look back on 2020, one of the most pivotal moments, I think, as a leader was a question that was posed at the leadership meeting in early January. Now, you have to remember, that's when, at the point, it was called the coronavirus. It was mostly in China, at least that was our understanding. And a question was posed: what decision do we need to make today? And if we don't make it, we're going to regret not making that decision in 2 to 3 weeks. I had never heard a question like that in a company. The urgency around that question was really profound. And what came out of that was an understanding and a very firm decision, and I would argue pretty significant cultural pivot, to not just have these platforms and our platforms worry about taking misinformation down, which we certainly do on an ongoing basis, but more importantly, to serve as a place of accurate and reliable information. And we launched the COVID Information Center as a result, I believe, of that single question. And the COVID Information Center has now been viewed by 2 billion people in over almost 190 countries. But importantly, it demonstrated what can platforms of our size do when we reach 3 billion people. We have an enormous responsibility, and it's not just about misinformation. It's actually now stepping into providing accurate and reliable information. And so we've taken the COVID Center, we've launched the Vaccine Information Center with a desire to give people accurate information about vaccines and encourage 50 million people to get vaccinated. We launched the Climate Science Center in September to provide accurate information about the climate. We launched the Voting Information Center to try to get 4 million people registered to vote and importantly, know where and how to vote. And so what this has really pushed us in is a real acceptance of just the enormity of our responsibility to, of course, keep the platform safe as we possibly can be, but also to provide accurate information. And I think as a culture, that shift was pivotal and very, very critical for our future.
Of course, your role is about helping businesses, small, medium, large, target their own audience as well. In this moment where all small businesses had to shut their doors, large businesses too, Facebook became crucial to be able to access
new buyers, to be able to actually sell, to be able to make ends meet. How did you see that responsibility as well, particularly around Black Lives Matter? I see the moves that you made in terms of signaling that this is a Black business, you can support it. What are some of the ways in which you think you really reorientated and refocused in that way too?
We recognize the role that we play in 200 million businesses' futures very quickly on in as this virus started to spread. And we realized that 200 million businesses depend on us and use our tools for free. Only a tiny fraction of those 200 million actually pay us, about 10 million of the 200 million. So 200 million small businesses were depending on us for tools, for education, for grants. And in addition, not just businesses overall, we understood how many of them were being severely impacted by the COVID virus. But more importantly, to some degree, was the impact on women and Black and Brown owned businesses. They were being disproportionately impacted at an alarming rate. And so we made very, very accelerated and I would say aggressive decisions and investments to become a real driver of economic growth and recovery for small businesses. We contributed, over $100 million in grants. We did $100 million to Black and Brown owned businesses. We rolled out accelerated training and commerce and shop capability so that, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your local village in London, there are businesses that were never digitized and suddenly they had to become digitized. You suddenly could order online or through mobile from maybe your favorite restaurant that never before even embraced it. We had vegetable shops and fruit stands in Europe that were suddenly using WhatsApp to try to take orders and deliver them to people's doorstops. And so the acceleration of the digital transformation for these businesses was done by urgency and a sense of survival. But I believe actually it's going to set them up for incredible growth going forward. And what we have seen, if history repeats itself, is often during crisis or major economic depressions, some of the most innovative and entrepreneurial activity comes out of that. And in the US alone, 4.4 million businesses were started in the last year. There's a flurry of entrepreneurial activity. And so that's why I remain very optimistic. I think you have permission to invent on the fly. You have permission to innovate and try things. And I think the digital transformation, yes, it was done, as I said, by necessity, but it is going to serve businesses incredibly well for the future.
So to that Maya Angelou, feeling of how you make them feel, remaining optimistic, do you think that the role of Facebook in all its family, whether it be WhatsApp, whether it be Messenger, of course, whether it be Instagram, remains as vital as it has been in 2020 and the beginning of 2021?
So, Caroline, I think our role is even more vital now than ever. And it's not Facebook, the company or the leader's role. It's not. It's actually the people that use our platforms. And when the stories get written about how we as a society, a global society, navigated the global pandemic, how did businesses recover? There's going to be incredible stories across the board. But I'll tell you what some of the most incredible stories are going to be. They're going to be about the humans, the people that use our platforms. And one of my favorite examples is I tried desperately to get my mother a COVID vaccination appointment. I tried at night. I was up trying to go on multiple websites and I was having no success. And I was panicked because I had just lost my dad. And so the notion of losing my mother to COVID was it's not on my watch. I cannot allow this to happen. I was really maniacal about it, but I had trouble getting her an appointment. And then I found the Facebook groups, the vaccination angels, the vaccination volunteers that are operating in every state and every country now to help the elderly, people that are not as technology enabled, to find vaccine appointments. Those are going to be the stories. Those are the human stories that are going to be written in the future around how did we all navigate this? How did the bravery of the first responders, what communities did to come together in Facebook groups? That is, I think, going to be the future of when the story is written, and the one that at the end of the day, it always comes down to the people. It's never what a single company does or doesn't do. It's the power of humanity. And I think people have brought that out in spades.
And you brought it out as you were telling us the way in which you shared your anxiety, the way in which you shared your vulnerability, how do you remain authentic to that? How do you ensure you keep those doors wide open when suddenly the life, maybe it doesn't turn a corner, but for you it does, and you do suddenly feel that you're not looking after you, however many dogs, the work-life balance gets a little bit easier. How do you think you will change as a leader and maintain that?
I think, I've been on a personal journey around this, the difference between effective and enlightened leadership for a number of years. As you mentioned, I've written about it and I intend to write more about it. And I am passionate about this. And so for me, it wasn't just COVID hitting that, suddenly I saw the light about bringing humanity into leadership in the way I show up. I've been on this journey for quite some time and I learn every single day about what that means and the reaction that I get from people. And so for me, this is something that is going to, if I don't show up as an enlightened leader and bringing my humanity to any environment I'm in, then I should pack my bags and go home because I care so deeply about it. And I really care about being approachable and making sure that everybody understands that none of us have this all figured out. We're all in this together and we're all on a learning journey across every dimension. And so what I'm most excited about is seeing other leaders getting the awareness and religion about this, because what that means for the future of work is that I think we're going to be in an environment that's much more kind. And I do believe at the end of the day, kindness in the work environment, which is a soft word, and many people will say, well, where are the hard metrics? You watch companies in the future, those that have happier employees and more kind environments, they're going to outperform other companies. I'm convinced of it. They're going to attract better talent and they're going to deliver better results. And I think that's a really good thing for everyone.
And you wrote about that in terms of actually being able to measure it, to make it a metric. You said, hey, Bloomberg, put out an index, a happiness index. The challenge is on us to be able to moderate and really measure it across businesses. And I love that piece in Fortune that you put out. Lastly, you said you want other leaders to get what you say is religion. The gospel of vulnerability is how you wrote about it. Are they getting it in Facebook more broadly, do you think?
I think we're seeing every leader go through an evolution on how they lead. And I think it's, again, just like small businesses had to reinvent themselves by necessity, I think what we're seeing across every company is leaders having to reinvent themselves by necessity. You can't go through a year like 2020 and have a global pandemic, have racial injustice, have mental health issues increasing at the rate they are, and not reevaluate how you show up as a leader. I just don't believe that's possible. And if it is, then you've just put an armored guard around yourself. And at the end of the day, I think those leaders are going to be far and few between. And I don't think they're going to be set up for success, because what people want real environments. They want to understand that it is okay to show up as who they are, the good, the bad, the ugly. And you have to create an environment where there is psychological safety in doing so. When people have that psychological safety in their work environment, they perform better. And the data is clear around that. So yes, I am passionate about an index, just as we saw what happened with ESG and how that is being used as an investment criteria. I actually think the happiness of cultures and the health of corporate cultures needs to be part of the financial evaluation as investors think about where to put their money.